Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest.
Well, hello, Karolina. Karolina Christopher is an integrative psychotherapist, very much in the same kind of vein as me on a professional level. So
Hmm.
it it's really quite interesting that we have similar kind of outlooks in the way we work as well. I thought initial training would have been very similar. So
Yes.
that's quite interesting for me anyway, because I found integrative style of learning was very much, I enjoyed that rather than focusing in one particular area. So
Yes.
yeah, so introduce yourself to everyone, Karolina. I'd like to know more about you.
Yeah. So, hi, Wendy and everyone. So, my name is Karolina Christopher. And as you said, I'm an integrative psychotherapist, which means that I have studied different ways of, human development and emotional health, particularly from different perspectives. And I work in private practice. I work online with people with therapeutic conversations, and I also use somatic work, so body work, and the creative arts in my work with people. And I work with adults and also teenagers, 13 to 19.
All right. That's really interesting. I think it's quite nice when we have I would say that as I trained as an integrative counsellor, for me, it meant that I've just got a bigger toolbox to kind of help clients with rather than it. Yeah, that's how I see it. Having a
Yes.
big toolbox for whatever suits for the client. And as you say, when you bring in other things like body work and kind of art therapy, it gives you the tools to help clients with, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also because I like to work in depth, so I work with longer term therapy where people really have the opportunity to go in depth, and there can be various things that could be so much easier to express with, maybe a quick drawing or using an image to express something, or using the body. So, for example, like breathing or simple movement or other things that help us feel present in the body, especially with trauma, because that's held in the body in a kind of wordless way quite often. So I feel that those things complement each other really nicely.
Yeah. Yes. So we were talking before we had this interview, before we did this podcast, we were talking very much about early relational trauma, because that is something that you're very interested in, and so am I. So
Yes.
Tell us more about that, what your thoughts are on that.
Yes. So I think early relational trauma is a kind of an invisible trauma very often, because it's something that, first of all, it's something people generally haven't heard about it. And if we've experienced it, we generally don't know about it. And it's really about what happens in our early childhood years where our emotional needs weren't met. So everything might have been, taken care of. You had a nice house to live in, there was food on the table, you had clean clothes and birthday presents and even holidays. So it looked like everything was fine, but there could be this lack of emotional warmth, in a sense, that the child needs. And that creates a kind of deficit in our relational experience. So there is something that's missing, that kind of warmth and closeness for the child.
And I guess the availability to the caregiver as a child, that
Yes.
emotional availability. Maybe they were working long hours, or maybe they were away a lot, or maybe they just weren't able to provide that themselves because the parent hadn't experienced it, so they didn't know how to provide it for the child.
Yes, and I think very often is actually necessarily not the case that the parent wasn't physically present. They may well have been physically present, but not so emotionally present, in fact. And of course, now we know a lot more about children's mental health and babies' mental health and their needs. And that's something that's changed a lot in our culture, because in the past, people used to think that babies were, didn't have these emotional needs. There was very much a focus on, the physical needs of the child. And then gradually we've learned more about the brain and emotions and how they even actually shape the brain. And so this is fairly new knowledge, I think. And there is so much more in that early relationship that is so important than just being, fed and changed and kept warm and so on.
So what is it that the children really need? What is it that they're missing? I mean, you talk about emotional, closeness, but maybe the audience needs to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, so there is this word called attunement, which is where we tune into the child's feelings. Whether the child is, sad, angry, happy, that the child is being met and mirrored in that. And that begins to shape our sense of self, because a child very much, as children, we are our emotions. We just experience them. And there's someone there that can meet us in that, so we can experience joy together with our caregiver.
Or sadness.
We can also be comforted when we're crying. We can be acknowledged when we're angry, even very simply by saying, "Oh, yes, I understand you got angry when, your brother took your toy." Or, "Oh, that made you sad, seeing that, in the cartoon, maybe, when the child is affected by something." And putting words to those feelings. There is a sense of empathy that the child experiences, which the child will feel, "I'm okay. It's okay to have these feelings. I'm not a problem. I'm not a bother. I'm valuable."
Yeah, and I guess too often the caregiver, well-meaningly, will kind of say, "Well, don't worry, don't be angry, don't be sad, it'll be okay." But they're not actually, as you say, not in tune with the child, and then the child doesn't acknowledge their feelings. They either feel that it's an emotion they shouldn't have, or they don't understand it, or they feel it's being dismissed.
Yes. And I think, as you say, the parent believes that they're doing the child a favor and also, as parents, we might be taught to distract the child, because if we focus on the emotion, there can be a fear that the emotion is going to get bigger and get out of hand. So we try and minimize it. But in fact, like you say, what the child hears is that this is not a good feeling to have. And maybe if I have this feeling, I won't be accepted because this is not something that child is able to reflect around. It's just wordless messages, in fact. But what we know now from neuroscience and brain research is that actually when we attend to a feeling, it actually can be contained and managed. And I think even as adults, if we're really upset, to have someone say, "Oh, what's happened? What are you upset about?" That in itself can feel comforting, rather than being told that we're silly or we shouldn't worry. So there's something about just being allowed to have those feelings, and that it's okay. It's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking about when, that we're not allowed to have those feelings. It's that when you said that about, oh, we're worried that the parent is worried that if the child is emotions are acknowledged, they'll just get bigger and out of hand. I hear that, I'm sure you've heard it too, but with clients, adult clients that come to me, they say, I'm so scared of starting to cry because I'm worried it won't stop. I'm so scared of allowing that emotion because I feel I don't know what will happen if I allow it. They feel that it will just become so big, it will be completely uncontrollable.
Yes, and sometimes in that context, people use the idea of Pandora's box. I'm scared of opening Pandora's box.
Yeah.
And I think in the context of what we're talking about, quite often, the fear is justified because that has already been their experience. So, for example, what that person is actually saying is, when I was a child, there was no one to help me when I got upset. And in fact, the feeling did get bigger and bigger, and it felt overwhelming because there was no one who could help me soothe it.
Yeah.
So it has already been experienced. And in therapy, you can almost relearn, and the therapy can be a place where now it can be experienced and it can be soothed and managed, and it's not going to be overwhelming.
Yes, and I think that's the difference. But it's interesting how we know that those childhood behaviors follow us into adulthood, and that's where people are still affected by what happened in their childhood. And I don't know about you, but I find so many clients, when you explain that to them and they talk about examples, and then you go, okay, this was a childhood wound and so on, they're quite surprised. They can't appreciate that something that happened in their childhood could still continue to affect them now.
Yes, and I think that's very much also in our culture. That is not, there's a lack of understanding in the culture, because in terms of raising children, there was very much a belief in the past that children won't remember anything. It doesn't matter if something, bad happens to you as a child, because you'll forget. And so that's a belief that I think is still present. And in a way it's true, because we don't believe it, we don't remember it consciously in our heads as an actual memory, but it's more in our bodies it will sit there like a kind of underlying sense of anxiety, or a sense of sadness, a sense that I'm not good enough, something bad's going to happen, having catastrophic thoughts. These are often the symptoms that we have, that can come from early experiences where, maybe something bad did happen and there was no one to comfort you. but we don't connect the two, I think. So, I
Mhm.
mean, people don't come to therapy saying, "Oh, I'd like help with my early trauma." People come, they say, I'm having these anxious thoughts going around in my head. I'm, I'm having, I feel really tearful. I really fear conflict in my relationship,
Mm.
or I'm really worried that someone's gonna get ill. So people have all these fears and worries, and that's often how we carry it inside. In disguise, it's a kind of disguised
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it can also feel very, it's like, can be a relief when you can begin to join up the dots
Mm.
and understand. Of course, I feel that way because this is what happened to me.
Mm.
And when it makes sense, we can, think about it with our adult brains instead.
Yes. I guess what we offer is a different perspective for those that have been struggling. There's a different perspective. This was your child. This is what happened in childhood, and yes, it is affecting you. But yes, it's not. It is the same. It's the same kind of feelings, but it's not the same situation. You can deal with it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, and also there is this kind of sense of finding a sense of safety in the body, which is why I do somatic work, because it could just be a sense that I can't quite relax, or I can't sleep well, I
Mm.
feel anxious, and those feelings can be worked with in the body to find a sense of internal, what we call regulation,
Yeah.
which is actually a sense of that is not in a stress mode.
Yeah.
We're not in.
Yeah. And I also, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people don't understand that the nervous system, when it becomes dysregulated, they may or may not have heard the fight or flight response. But I think there's something very valuable. I'm sure you talk to your clients about it, about what it is, a survival system, and why the body goes into that state and what happens. But I'm sure you find that it's quite a surprise for people. The one thing that I am surprised by, I don't know why, but I am. People come, they've been to their GP, they're struggling with anxiety. Their GP gives them medication, but they've never talked to them about what's happening, what is anxiety.
Mm.
Never have it explained to them of what's going on in their body. And I think that that's really sad, because they aren't told, well, you may get these kind of feelings, your heart beats faster because you've got a rush of adrenaline. They're never told all the things that happen to the body or why it's happening, and therefore they're just given medication and told, yeah, this will sort you out. I know GPs don't have a lot of time, but goodness me, when we can just say to our clients, but your body's doing what it's supposed to be doing, it's just reacting at the wrong time, it's misfiring, if you like.
Mm. Yeah, and then anxiety becomes this scary thing that can't be made sense of, and it's not placed in context, and something that needs to be suppressed.
Yeah.
But I think when
Actually, worse than suppressed, if I may, sorry, interrupt you.
yes,
It's
go
not
on.
suppressed, but it's even fought against.
Yes.
You're fighting it. I'm feeling anxious. This is awful, and so they build on it rather than going, okay, now I understand what's happening. All right, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, I can deal with it now. But instead, because they fight it, don't they? They fight that feeling instead of almost, and it makes it worse.
And of course, you will fight it if, as a child, for example,
Mm.
you didn't have anyone to help you when you were anxious. It felt overwhelming. So it's this awful feeling that you want to get rid of at all costs.
Yeah.
And I think children have many anxieties that aren't necessarily picked up on. And the children are told, oh, don't be silly, oh, it's not that bad. And so we don't tune into the child's anxiety to help them, feel more confident about whatever situation it might be. It could be something at school or, but then of course it can also be something in the home, like parents arguing that children can't quite address. So, and what happens as well then, I think, is that, you mentioned fight or flight, but we also have, the other response, which is the freeze response. And I think that's quite a common response to be activated, especially in early relational trauma, because it's almost like we dull ourselves and lose the life spark in a way. So, and then maybe we're taught that trauma will trigger fight or flight. So people don't recognize that I don't feel that. So, I can't have suffered trauma because I'm not, in this unbalanced state. There's just something that doesn't feel right. And that can be the freeze response, where we kind of shut down our feelings instead.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly that. And as you say, they just latch onto one or two. They may have heard of those, but they don't appreciate all the others as well. So yeah, very true. Wow. So we've talked a lot, quite a while, and we've explored quite a lot. And thank you very much for all that you've talked about, and it's been really interesting, Karolina.
Yeah.
If people would like to get to know you more and more about what you do, I will put all the details in the show notes, but what's one easy way of people getting in touch with you?
So the easiest way would be to just go to my website, which is carolinachristopher.com, Karolina with a K. And so you can read a bit more about early relational trauma on there, and you can read about, how I work with people as well. And you can book a session as well, if you like, straight on the website.
Okay.
Or send me an email. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation today. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.